Open sesame!
Commander Klingon vessel. We are energizing transport of the... Now.
One, engage!
Welcome. This is from the Holodeck. You can find all of our shows, past, present, and in the future, wherever you listen to podcasts. Just search From the Holodeck. Hello, Dave.
How's it going, everybody? It's been a while.
Yeah. So, are you ready to get into our discussions for Star Trek Enterprise, Dave?
Absolutely.
All right. So
shockingly, yes.
shockingly.
Well, you got to remember, Mike, I mean, let's face it. Enterprise is one of those series. This has been one of the series that has been hard for me and you to pitch to Star Trek fans because a lot of Star Trek fans do not like Enterprise.
Yeah, well, preconceptions. Sometimes something that may not have worked 20-some years ago, you go back and watch with fresh eyes, and you find that, you know what? It's not as bad as you remember. It actually is much better than you remember. And in this episode, David, we'll be delving into those very aspects, retrospectively looking back at Enterprise as we officially begin our Star Trek Enterprise coverage with a detailed breakdown and discussion of the pilot episode, Broken Bow, in its entirety, meaning parts 1 and 2. And when combined, the pilot comes out to be approximately 90 minutes or so in length. And interestingly, Dave, I don't know if you noticed this, but when viewed as one episode, structurally speaking, it works much like a feature film with all of the appropriate beats.
Yes, I noticed that too on the rewatch. Is like, it's interesting to actually to do these rewatches of various shows, and you actually start seeing how formatting works. And this is one of those examples where I look back at it. And I remember seeing the pilot, the first 2 episodes of Enterprise, and at the time, it was okay. I liked it. It was interesting, but it was kind of lackluster. But now that I look back, have done a rewatch, watching part 1 and part 2, it is like watching a Star Trek film.
Yeah.
And it's like hilarious to me that like, man, they should have just basically, in hindsight, yeah, I get back in the day, they would never have done that. They never would have actually released a 90-minute pilot on TV. They would have to break it up into 2. But nowadays, I honestly think if they were to do something like this, I think people would actually gravitate towards Enterprise.
Well, now the pilot episode can only be viewed as one episode on all streaming platforms. I'm not sure if you have the Blu-ray or DVD copies of the series, whether or not it counts as one episode or 2. But if you go to Paramount Plus as well as Pluto when they play it, it is now put together as a singular episode titled Broken Bow 1 and 2.
Yes.
So obviously they know that it functions as one complete piece. I would even say it's really a part 1 and part 2. There are certain Star Trek series, like arcs, where they do the part 1, the part 2. It was very common.
Continued.
Yeah, very common during the Rick Berman era. But they were essentially written as actual complete episodes, whereas Broken Bow feels incomplete if you just watch the first half. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the reason why they just now put it together as a singular episode. If you are just finding this podcast and you haven't listened to us before, we did do an Enterprise preview show. We put out 2 episodes where we just kind of get the poison out, meaning we express our thoughts and feelings, 20 plus years later on Enterprise, the ups and downs. It's a generalized discussion. So scroll through your podcast feed just a couple shows and you'll find those episodes available. All right. So, yes, David, when you look at this episode, it is an effective inaugural episode in that it lays out the path for the series. And despite some imperfections, it is probably, in my opinion, the most consistent series. And I'm not talking just about the pilot now, in general, in terms of direction. And that's saying a lot because the producers and the writers were caught amid a cultural change while the series was being written. And when you're writing a show in the midst of major cultural upheaval, if you don't have a strong sense of purpose with your series, you can find that your show starts being dragged down by all of the social and political aspects that are going on during the time of your show. And when you do that, because you want to be relevant, you lose track of what you were originally doing. Sometimes things fall to the wayside and you lose sight. Fortunately, Star Trek Enterprise was built around this cultural upheaval. Even though the franchise itself or the IP Enterprise was, for the most part, figured out, set up, and pretty much done prior to the events of 9/11, there was still a lot of things, social anxieties that was leading up to the 9/11 attacks.
Yes.
That had to do with the Middle East. And of course, with the ever evolving technologies, you know, the series for the most part was able to maintain consistency. What it set out to do, it never backtracked. Yes, it changed its format, meaning the narrative style, the way the series was written, as we have discussed numerous times now, changed drastically between season 2 and season 3.
Yes.
But the themes, the philosophical discourse initiated in the opening season, specifically in this episode, were continued throughout. Whereas many other Star Trek series often start off one way and eventually would change priorities, delving into new philosophical or thematic waters. With Enterprise, as I said, their changes moving to season 3 was more writing style changes, transitioning from predominantly episodic to the hybrid narrative or episodic serial hybrid that we talk about a lot.
Yeah, well, we're basically adapting to the change of television at that time. But when you look at, like, narratively speaking, Enterprise is one of the most, I think the best word to describe it is what me and you said off air, consistent. Enterprise is like one of the most consistent shows, even though when we look at it in hindsight and in totality, you look at Enterprise and everyone points out, oh, that ending is terrible. But if you think about it, most Star Trek fans don't really criticize anything about like the themes and the elements that were discussed in Enterprise. Why? Because it was pretty much well thought out every season. You had this consistent narrative that you could follow.
Well, just look at the temporal Cold War in itself. It's an idea that was vaguely alluded to in the, I wouldn't say vaguely, carefully alluded to in the first episode. It was partially designed to propel the plot, but it was more of a MacGuffin in that first episode. But fast forward to season 4, time travel, the temporal Cold Wars were a predominant part of the series from beginning until the end. Yeah. And that's just one overarching element or theme that was consistent, that was actually introduced in the first episode. And we're going to go through many of these things in today's discussion.
Yes.
What are your initial thoughts on the Enterprise's first episode?
The first episode was misunderstood. Because when you actually, in hindsight, and that's the thing that sucks, is kind of like, with a lot of the shows like this, a lot of their greatness don't come out till afterwards. It's like Deep Space Nine. No one realized how great Deep Space Nine was till it was gone. And then now with Enterprise, you're beginning to see a lot of people like talk about how, oh, this was an interesting concept that Enterprise brought into the Star Trek universe. And in hindsight, when I look at Broken Bow 1 and 2 as together, Do you realize that basically I walked away from those two episodes back to back more in touch with like the Star Trek universe? Because why? There's more substance done with a lot of the concepts that were already established in Star Trek. They just added to it. That was the beautiful thing about Enterprise. After I rewatched the whole series, I'm going, wait a minute. A lot of the history that me and you talk about in past shows, a lot of it was first established in Enterprise. And a lot of people don't actually realize that, because a lot of the concepts that were in Enterprise were so, I would say that they were so different and not used to the fan base at that time. It's kind of like what happened with Deep Space Nine. And I will say with Discovery today, Star Trek, those series deal with things that are different, that the fan base at the time are not used to. But given time, you know, I guarantee you, 5 years, I mean, even today, there is some fans saying, you know, Discovery's not that bad. A lot of like the narratives, a lot of the themes in Discovery were actually really good. And I'm like, going, yes, we've been saying that since the get-go.
Sometimes it takes time.
It takes time
to pass before you can allow your preconceptions and emotions connected to an IP to subside a bit. And then you can look back without those distractions and say, okay, you know, it's not what I had wanted originally, but it's not as bad as I had thought. Because I do feel like a lot of the fan reaction, and this is true with almost everything, fans have stories, meaning, of course, episodes and movies written in their head.
Yes.
And when they don't get what they had come up with themselves, they scream foul ball. And that's not a great way to be a fan, because you're not writing these. And you have to appreciate that the people involved, hopefully, and have faith and confidence that they do know what they're doing. And for the most part, I think Star Trek has evaded much of the problems that a lot of long-standing IPs face. And I don't know if it's because of any one person, but as I've said time and time again, though, I do believe it's more or less the fact that Roddenberry has a definitive playbook with rules, with do's and don'ts, and what Star Trek is and what Star Trek isn't. And because he has those very specific guardrails, unless you're a complete asshole like homeboy first season Picard, Shaban, you adhere to those guardrails, because that's what keeps Star Trek coherent and consistent.
Yes.
And going back to what you're saying, David, about Enterprise kind of fleshing out things that other Star Trek had already introduced, you are right about that. And I wanted to touch on that, David, because that's a complaint I have a lot about Star Trek. And not just Star Trek, but long-running IPs. They always go back to the well. They never move forward. They're stuck in the past with prequels, reboots. Look at Star Trek. Star Trek is stuck with Captain Kirk. I love Captain Kirk, but movies, Captain Kirk. Reboots, Captain Kirk. Captain Kirk, Spock. And for the most part, it works for long-term fans, but new fans, eventually you're going to have to, come up with new things. But what Enterprise did, Dave, was that they took these little ideas, things that were introduced, even canon inconsistencies, used it, fleshed it out, and fixed it.
Yes.
We always knew of Andorians. We didn't know anything about them.
Nope.
We thought we knew a lot about Vulcans. It turns out we knew nothing about Vulcans. We can go on and on and on with Enterprise and what the temporal, what's the name of those people? Not the Temporal Cold War, the Department of Temporal Investigations.
Yes.
It was introduced in Deep Space Nine, played a part in Voyager, I think 2 or 3 episodes. Enterprise takes it, makes it part of its actual narrative strategy, and makes it a part of its show from beginning to end.
Yes.
And fleshes it out in a way that introduces the Temporal Cold War, and it plays with the relevance and the fate and the destiny of our heroes. In a lot of ways, David, Enterprise is the series that turned Star Trek into a definitive deterministic world or universe. Because prior to Enterprise, you could say that this series didn't necessarily hinge on fate. But because of the nature of writing a prequel, when you start delving into prequel territory, you are essentially butting up against predetermination.
Yes.
So now that becomes a part of your world. It's a bit of a meta aspect of writing prequels. And that's what started it all, Enterprise. Then you have your series like Discovery, also fate, determinism, because you're working within boundaries that you have to adhere to. And we know what's going to happen. Same thing with the Kelvin timeline movies.
I was going to bring up, yeah.
Fate and destiny playing a part. So Enterprise should be credited with so much more. And that's the reason why, David, we are doing this retrospective. I love Deep Space Nine. It's probably my favorite Star Trek series.
Yes.
But there is plenty of people out there that have discovered it, found it, and love it. Enterprise is still the redheaded stepchild.
Yes.
And I want to get into these ins and outs because there is so much here with Star Trek Enterprise.
Oh, especially when I went back and I rewatched the pilot episodes, I'm like going, man, I didn't realize that. Yeah, they're the first ones that actually talked about how, you know, the Vulcans had their quote unquote terrorist groups.
Yeah.
The
logic extremists.
The logic extremists. Yeah. And I'm going, later on, you see a lot of that stuff being brought in with a lot of like the newer Star Trek Discovery.
Yeah.
You know, even with Abrams, I'm glad you brought up the Kelvin movies. Abrams even played around with it.
Yep.
Because like the things that I love that today when I look at Star Trek and I go, oh man, I love these certain elements. I love the predeterminism because by far I love the fact that our entire universe is predicated on two guys. It's Spock and Kirk. And it's like the funniest thing ever.
David, did they save all organic life like Burnham?
Exactly.
No, they didn't.
They didn't.
Burnham is number one.
But without Spock, we have no Burnham.
There you go.
Exactly. So like, I love the fact that this got introduced not in like the new Star Trek era. This got introduced in Enterprise about predeterminism, how like, oh, everything has to fall in place. Even Voyager played with that in the last couple seasons, especially, you know, in one of their biggest themes was actually what Janeway trying to change the fate of Voyager, and then you find out you can't do that, Janeway.
Yeah,
that's against the temporal law.
Yeah, because I don't believe originally Gene Roddenberry had planned for Star Trek to be largely deterministic, but it's just the nature of the evolving franchise. When you're dealing with prequels and, you know, I guess even shows that are not technically prequels, but they're delving into time periods prior to TV shows that we've already watched, there's canon adherence that you have to maintain. And that's why we have even highly deterministic aspects in Star Trek Strange New Worlds pertaining to Pike.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so let's officially get into this. Episodes 1 and 2, Broken Bow, Part 1 and 2, written by Rick Berman and Brandon Braga, and directed by James L. Conway. The synopsis: Earth launches its first starship of exploration, Enterprise, on a mission to return an injured Klingon to his home world. So, Hoshi Sato, for me, David, is the MVP of the episode and much of the first couple seasons of Enterprise. I have said T'Pol is my absolute favorite character just because I love Vulcans, I love Vulcan society, I love logic, I love philosophy. But Hoshi Sato is MVP, and I say this with intention to bring attention to her. No one talks about Sato.
No
one acknowledges her. But do you understand how awesome she is as a character, how capable she is as a character, learning languages like that?
Yes.
I mean, learning how to speak Klingon in, 20 minutes? Some people may think that's impossible to learn languages like that, but there are linguistic geniuses out there
yeah.
who could hear basic speech. And because they understand language so well, they can figure out verbs and conjugation very, very quickly.
Very quickly.
And that's something that we don't ever talk about when it comes to Hoshi Sato. She essentially is the universal translator for the first several episodes, and she invents the universal translator. Correct me if I'm wrong, David. She invents the universal translator, which becomes a permanent fixture in all of Star Trek. It's the only way they can communicate with all of the species they come in contact with.
Yeah. And I love that because, like, again, they're taking something that has always been a concept in Star Trek and fleshing it out, giving it an actual origin. Like, trying to explain. It's one of the fun things.
And not like a cheesy origin, like, where did Han Solo get that blaster?
Exactly. It's kind of like that, those programs that love to see how technology in Star Trek influences in real world.
Mm-hmm.
And essentially with Sato's character, that's what they did for the Universal Translator. And it makes so much sense, and it's so fun to actually think, yeah, there are, as you said, linguistics out there that are, prodigies that basically, if they hear something...
That's the word I was looking for, prodigy, yeah.
If they hear something for 5 minutes, they pick up the language like it's nothing.
Yeah.
And it's so cool seeing, like, this series back in, like, what was this, 19... No.
What are you talking about? Enterprise?
Yeah,
2001.
2001.
Yeah.
And they finally explained, why is it that basically Captain Kirk could talk to everybody? Doesn't matter the race, doesn't matter the species.
And again, Enterprise fleshing out ideas, because who the fuck knew what a communications officer did, really?
Exactly.
Like, all we know of Uhura is like, channel's open, Captain.
The joke was she was the secretary.
Yeah, Uhura didn't really do much.
Yeah.
Whereas Hoshi Sato, through her character, they were able to explain what a communications officer really does. So it's good. I mean, we saw Uhura speak Klingon in various episodes. I think it was Star Trek V where they were.
But the thing
right?
was,
is that the one where they were talking? Yeah,
It was never dived into, because it was only till later that they tried to actually to show that there was more to a lot of the crew than just their background characters for Kirk and Spock and Bones.
Yeah.
That you see the one that basically gets the most, I feel, development of the original characters is Uhura, because then it was only until the later in the movies you begin to start delving into, she could communicate with any species for some strange reason, and it's because, like, she can pick things up.
Well, we're assuming if you're a communications officer, I guess the assumption is they have to be linguistic experts.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I do not believe that was ever fully explored or explained until Enterprise.
Oh, yeah. And the beautiful thing, too, is I think that Linda Park, who actually plays Hoshi Sato, later on throughout the series becomes, like, Enterprise is one of my favorite characters. I mean, the mirror universe is my favorite moment for that character, because she ends up becoming, like,
the Empress.
She becomes the Empress.
Yeah. She's an interesting character. I'm looking forward to get into those episodes where she's more front and center.
Yeah.
And the reason for that, Dave, is because, to be perfectly honest, I have, throughout the years, I've had problems. In fact, I've even shared those problems with you with Hoshi. I felt like she was a complainer in the open. Originally, I thought that. She was nothing but a complainer. What was she doing on a ship if she didn't like it out in space? I just didn't like her. But when I first watched the show, but rewatching the series throughout the last several years, I've really come to appreciate the character. And it's kind of interesting how your mind can be changed when you actually take a step back and not allow yourself to get annoyed with little silly things that are part of characterization, and just watch who they become. And that's, David, and this is, I think that's what we're saying a lot here, is that you kind of have to wait to see the series come to an end before you can definitively say whether or not it's a good series. Well, obviously there are some shows you can just watch 6 episodes, it sucks. But oftentimes with a show that relies on understanding its complete or I should say understanding it as a complete piece, it's unfair to judge some of these shows based on 1, 2, 3, 4 episodes. And I would say the same thing about Discovery. Discovery, in my opinion, you don't really appreciate the show until you watch all 5 seasons.
Well, it's the it's the biggest difference between what I feel classic television writing and then modern television writing. And what I mean by that is, like, if you look at like old classic television, you really can't just watch 2-3 episodes and know the characters front to back. A lot of like the old classic television shows, you have to go through multiple seasons to get into their characters, and their characters become fleshed out. And in a lot of ways, that's partially what made TNG so great, because they had 20 episodes, 20 plus episodes a season, and they were able to dive into all the ensemble cast characters the best that they could. And
yeah,
you can't do that nowadays with modern television, because number one, the audience is different. I don't think the audience has this sounds terrible, but this is honest to God truth. The attention span to actually watch a classic television show and sit through 10 episodes of, say, TNG and really understand the characters of at least Picard, Data, and Worf. I don't think they can.
Wait, you're saying that their attention span isn't there
The attention span
anymore
isn't there
to
because
sit
people,
through 20 plus episodes of things that may not matter to the main storyline?
Yes.
I would agree. There are definitely certain audiences who just want to watch a very straightforward, serialized story with 6 to 10 episodes.
Yes, like bang, you're done through 6 to 10.
That surprises me that there's people like that, but there are. I feel like the more episodes, the better. If you're a good writer and you have a good handle on your series, you should be able to write easily 30, 35 plus episodes of your show. And if you complain that you can't, then you shouldn't be writing for TV. All right, so setting aside the decon chamber, which we'll get into a little bit later, as well as the blue undies, which also made its debut in the very first episode, let's talk about the Vulcans more in depth. Okay. That's really what we're going to focus on for the rest of our discussion. One of the biggest themes throughout the series is the idea of deep-rooted prejudice. Not necessarily hate, but the idea that we must break our preconceived notions by acknowledging them and then working through them. And this is largely done in Star Trek Enterprise between 3 species: the humans, Vulcans, and Andorians.
Yes.
The beginning of which was started with this very episode we are discussing. Archer's reactions, for example, to the Vulcan High Command are incredibly hostile.
Yes.
And it's something that I remember taking me aback a bit when I first watched it, because I always was we were all led to believe the Vulcans were allies of the Federation.
Mm-hmm.
And then we find out, yes, they were allies, but they had a bit of an antagonistical relationship because the humans perceived the Vulcans as purposely holding them back.
Yes.
The Vulcans, of course, had their own perspective on why this was necessary. They believed humans must continue to mature and curb their emotional ambitions prior to going into space and meeting new alien species.
Yes.
T'Pol said, I believe, during the very opening moments that humans need to look beyond their provincial attitudes and volatile nature.
Oh, yeah. It was because, like, the big thing by far that I remember the whole story that started in Enterprise was the fact that the Vulcans constantly pointed at us as humans and kind of pointed at our history and said, look, this is your history. We can see patterns that humans are not ready to be out here.
Yeah.
Because
the Vulcans took centuries for them to... What's the word I'm looking for? For them to get control of their emotions. Yes. Because they're a highly emotional, volatile, violent species. That's what led to their embracement of logic and and purging and the purging of emotions was because they realized that their emotions were too powerful. And interestingly, David, a lot of people don't realize this. I think new listeners, that the Vulcans were created in a lot of ways as a way to point to humanity's past mistakes as well.
Because think about how like the original series always went. Spock would always question Kirk about humanity's past, and then Kirk would turn around and make an excuse, for humanity. Say, well, we need to learn better. Okay, and then that would be the moral of the story.
Yeah,
and but here with Enterprise, there's no one. That was the one thing that kind of surprised me, is instead of having like that Kirk moment where he accepts humanity's fallacies and everything else, you have Archer who does not accept humanity's fallacies, and to some degree acts like. I think the best way to put it is what me and you have said multiple times in shows when we talk about our captains. Archer's fault is the fact that he seems so naive.
His flaws, yeah.
Yeah, his flaw is the fact that, dude, you have no idea where you are.
Well, that's built in. That's what I'm trying to say. Like, this is all Archer's resistance to accept that they're still 100 years young. Meaning 100 years ago, they were still killing each other.
Uh-huh.
He doesn't think of things that way. He thinks of things as, this is our time. You're preventing us from achieving our greatness. And how dare you? That's the setup for pretty much the first half, if not the entire Enterprise run. That antagonistic relationship begins to die out once DePaul becomes more firmly on the side of Starfleet and the Enterprise crew. But that's part of the enjoyment for me in this series, is the back and forth between the humans and the Vulcans, that philosophical dialectic. Are you ready to be out in space, or are you not ready to be out in space?
Yes.
Because if you are, you wouldn't be doing these things. And that's continually what was done in the first episode. Vulcans pointing to the mistakes. Why did you do that? Why'd you do this? Do you see what you did? And at first, it becomes a point of contention between the Enterprise crew, specifically Archer, and the Vulcan High Command. But eventually, there becomes a point, and I don't want to get too far into it because that's in later episodes, Archer does start to acknowledge that they have a lot to learn.
Yeah.
But that's the interesting part about this entire series for me, because this becomes the overarching premise or theme for the entire series. Is humanity ready? And you take that and pair it with a slow type of burn dissection of real world colonialism through allegory. And what you get is classic Star Trek. We see a human species that is anxious to explore without thinking of the consequences that such a thing could bring about. And when you take many of these ideas and trim them down, what you ultimately get, this is what the writers were doing, is a rebuttal to ethnocentrism, which is a word, if people are not familiar with it, it simply is a word that describes the tendency of individuals to view their own cultural group as central or superior. And oftentimes it leaves the so-called central group to judge other cultures based on their own cultural standards.
Yes.
And this is very classic TNG type of things, very classic TOS type of things. And you have that built in, not just in one episode of Enterprise, but within the entire series. And as a means of textual evidence, David, the writers highlight this through Soval's words to Archer in this episode and Starfleet when he says, there is no time to be imposing your ethical beliefs. So what we get is an argument against ethnocentrism and the argument for rational thought.
Yes.
Which is brilliant. So ethnocentrism is present when any cultural group, just to be clear here, assumes their way of life is the norm.
Yes.
And this, David, moving forward will be a key term that we no doubt will return to numerous times during our Enterprise discussions, because that is the cornerstone, if not the foundation, of this series.
And I think that is one of the one of the crutches that a lot of Star Trek fans lean on as a problem with Enterprise, because it's essentially challenging one of the tenets of the Federation, which is, hey, we all get along, and this is the way we all act, the Federation way. And here comes a series in Enterprise that says, well, wait a minute. You can't just show up on someone's. I think the best one was like, I don't know if it was in this, if it was in later episodes, but there was an adage where basically they're being told you can't show up on someone's doorstep.
Yeah.
And accept that, and it
was in the first season. I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
And think that they're going to just welcome you with open arms.
Yeah.
No, that doesn't work that way.
Yeah, just because you are friendly, neighborly species that, first off, views that behavior as friendly and neighborly does not mean another species views that type of behavior as friendly and neighborly. They may view it as hostile and overly pushy.
Yes.
So that's the brilliance of Enterprise, is they take all of those philosophical ideas that much of Star Trek is built on, and they don't just use it for one episode. They use it for the entire premise of the series at large.
And they challenge it. They absolutely challenge it.
Absolutely. That's why I love Enterprise. And when people get mad at Enterprise saying, oh, I can't believe what they did with Archer. Archer turned mean and went against Starfleet principles. Did he, though? I mean, first off, Starfleet was brand new. The Federation didn't exist. People need to remember that this is a series that is about the road to utopia. We're not quite there yet. And I know there were a lot of, and still are, a lot of academics and critics, fans who were and are so opposed to how Starfleet and some of their actions were characterized, because they say that this is/was an abomination of Roddenberry's utopia. But as I just said a moment ago, what many fail to understand is that utopia Roddenberry created in early Star Trek was not quite there yet at this period.
Yes.
Of course, I'm speaking of canon chronology. This was a series about the road to
Utopia.
That utopia, where humanity managed to rid itself of many of the issues that plagued humanity. But the question that is posed is, how will humankind react when the very values that allowed for their progress are challenged by hostile forces? And T'Pol said, because this episode's filled with great logic, Vulcan nuggets. Yeah. I mean, T'Pol said as much to Archer when she told him it remains to be seen whether humanity will revert to its baser instincts. So again, emphasizing and or highlighting the actual premise of the series. Is humankind ready for space? Is it ready to go out into the universe and meet these other species? And this skeptical stance becomes a key thread in the series, as the crew of the Enterprise are continually challenged and confronted with various acts of hostility, difference, and even moral ambiguity that test their capacity for restraint, cooperation, and ethical consistency. And just one episode I want to point to that comes just right down, I want to say this season, just a few episodes down the road, is when Tucker is completely flabbergasted by a species that has 3 genders.
Yes.
And he tries to impose his own idea of what gender is onto the species, so much so that he destroys the diplomacy between the humans and that species.
Yep.
And he doesn't get the error of his ways. He doesn't get it.
Yes.
T'Pol looks at complete disgust. Like, what? In fact, the first season, that's all she ever did was stare at him with like this regard of like, who are you? You have sex with random alien women. You get pregnant.
And then later on, he ends up sleeping.
Well, suddenly she understood it. She's like, oh, I get it.
Oh, I get it now.
I get this appeal. Dude, I will say Tucker.
Tucker's more actually the character I wanted to watch.
Tucker is the biggest OG in all of Star Trek. He is more gangster than Kirk.
Yes.
Because he plays it chill. He doesn't go after the women. They come to him.
Yeah.
He never chases after the ladies.
And if you notice, he doesn't even question it.
And he doesn't question it. And when it's happening, he plays dumb. Like, is this really happening? Like, dude, T'Pol has her shirt off, bro. It's happening.
It's happening. And it's like, why? This is the guy that basically throughout the series I started really liking the most out of all the characters, because I'm like going, Tucker is like all us fans. We want to be like Tucker. Where it's kind of like, we don't know what's going on, but it's working.
Yeah. He is such a good character.
He is. And as I said, that's what is one of the, I understand it's one of the most frustrating moments for a lot of Star Trek fans who do like Enterprise. When you get to that moment, it tells a lot about some of these characters that have still stuck with fans today. And out of the Enterprise crew, everyone basically agrees Tucker was actually one of everyone's favorites.
Yeah. Without a doubt. He was great. In fact, there's a scene in this episode, the pilot episode, where we see more of those ethical quandaries happening. In fact, it really does emphasize humanity's moral naivety.
Yes.
And the need to look at things from others' perspectives. When the Enterprise crew went to Rigel 10 and Commander Tucker grew angry with... Yes. I think it was a Laurelian mother who was teaching her son to breathe.
Yes.
She was weaning her child off, I think it was called methyl oxide, and onto oxygen. And Tucker believed she was purposely hurting her child and tried to interfere. And T'Pol looked at him and said, learn to objectify other cultures so you know when to interfere and when not to. Again, the lesson against ethnocentrism. Yeah. Understand other cultures before you try to interfere and assist, because if you understand them, they may not need assistance. They may not want your assistance. And honestly, it's the simple things like such a scene, for me, that does so much in the way of social commentary. Mm-hmm. Speaking on our tendency to misunderstand other cultures and the need to exercise caution before casting judgments. Mm-hmm. And I suppose the crux of the problem that the writers were seeking to unearth is the issue of interference. Learning the balance between ethical responsibility and the imposition of our values, which, in my opinion, this is kind of a dated idea. It's very much a Star Trek liberal humanism idea that a lot of people are not on board with anymore. And it's the idea of not interfering. Let people not being isolationists. That's not what Star Trek is about. But allowing people to grow on their own terms. Well, letting people, cultures, nations figure things out for themselves before we go in with our American exceptionalism and try to fix things for them.
Well, it's the beginnings of what a lot of Star Trek fans hold dear to the heart, which is the Prime Directive.
Correct.
You cannot interfere with a species that might be lower in technology than you.
Listen, David, I'm an advocate for instituting the Prime Directive for the United States of America.
Oh, absolutely.
Please, can we quit interfering?
Stop interfering. Let people figure out on their own. You don't have to actually say, this works for us, then it should work for you.
Yeah, imagine if we lived,
doesn't.
David, imagine if we lived by Star Trek principles.
Oh my God, Mike.
We would be having sex a lot with lots of people. And we would leave people alone if they want to be left alone.
Why can't, wait a minute. You mean to tell me if people just sat down and watched Enterprise, America might actually be better?
David, yes. Star Trek is not given enough credit within entertainment circles. Academics get it. Most academics get what Star Trek is about, and they understand it. And even if they don't agree with it, they do say the lessons here they may not agree with all of the lessons, but they are good lessons in themselves.
Yes.
TV, when they try to do things like that in today's environment, it just comes off heavy-handed. Whereas Star Trek has always managed to do it right, even in recent episodes of Strange New Worlds.
Yeah.
Handling cultural commentary or social commentary in such an effective way that a lot of times it goes over your head if you're not paying attention. The lesson is learned, but you're not really realizing, oh, this is an allegory for something that just happened like 6 months ago in the real world.
Oh yeah, think about Discovery. Discovery did that really well, especially in the later seasons.
They heavy-handedly tackled certain identity politics, but once they got that heavy-handedness out of the way, moving to like seasons 4 and 5,
Yeah,
it worked so well.
it worked much better because they I think at that point the writers started really thinking about what they were trying to say instead of trying to kind of scream what the echo chamber does.
Right.
5-second screams of sentences that they want to actually put into coherent thought. No, don't scream. Just think about your thought and actually what's the proper word?
Think about your thought. Isn't it the thing, though? If you're thinking about your thought, that is the thought.
That is the thought. So wow.
Contemplation is probably a better word.
Contemplation's a better word.
Contemplate. There you go.
But yeah, it's better to actually contemplate your point than immediately spew it out into the ethos.
Yeah. And also, David, there is something to be said about allegory and metaphor. It's more powerful. It allows your message to get through without pissing off someone that might feel attacked
Yes.
by the overt political stance that a writer and or director might be taking.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Is
Oh,
that
yeah. I mean, but here's the thing. Everyone feels nowadays, Mike, as a writer, that they have to attack. You have to be aggressive with your thought because you have to put your thought out there and make sure you get your point across. So in order to do that, you have to be aggressive.
Yeah, this new generation, they don't know how to be activists. I mean, back in the old day, activism was violent when it needed to be, but was mostly about empathy, love, kindness, getting high, and fucking.
Yes.
Like,
flash your boobs.
Yeah, and then when violence was called for, violence happened.
Yes.
In today's environment, it's like, how can I be the most aggressive and the most obnoxious?
And now, the violence.
And no sex, because sex is not.
And no sex. Exactly.
Sex is bad.
Sex is bad. You can't rely on gender politics, Mike.
So stupid. All right, so bringing it back to the social commentary and the naivety of the humans, we're focusing a lot on the humans themselves because in a lot of ways, I think people tend to translate that to being about us personally.
Yeah.
But the Vulcans also played a part, their culture themselves, and we saw the beginnings of that in this episode as well. Their culture is also used to explain things that are happening in our society, to push back on certain prejudices, as well as isolationism. So this is not to say the Vulcans were the moral exemplars here. Far from it. But ultimately, when you look at this episode, it's about working together, which is what Star Trek has always been about.
Yes.
Even from DePaul and the Vulcan side of things, what did they end up doing? They end up learning a lot from human tenacity, reflection, human emotion, and human empathy. They learn. DePaul learns. And this is what Star Trek has always done. They've always leaned to that balance. People seem to forget that Spock never went through with the Kolinar.
Yes.
He realized that he was stronger and a better Vulcan with his emotion. He just kept it in check. He never went back to do. He never
went back because he realized that basically doing that would make him half a person.
Yes, and the very thing that the motion picture was attempting to convey was this idea of honing both logic and emotion. Bringing it together makes you a complete person that can tackle the world's problems. And that's why when you look at Enterprise and you see from beginning to end what happens between humans and Vulcans, they're both working through these growing pains. And at the end of it, the Vulcans learn from the humans and the humans learn from the Vulcans.
Yes.
It's awesome. It's just powerful stuff. So, David, this does bring us to the end of our discussion. The next episode, we're going to get into the temporal Cold War. as it was introduced in the pilot episode as well,
Yes.
and the purpose of the Klingons, and if we have time, a discussion on the VFX. I might save that for a third episode because I really want to get into how the technology moving into the new millennia,
Oh my God, yeah.
was a game changer for a lot of TV shows. And the shows that took advantage of that new technology, like Star Trek Enterprise early on, it doesn't always hold up.
No, it doesn't. But the thing is, the thing that's cool is actually seeing the building blocks of like
Correct.
what that technology for filmmaking turns into.
Yeah.
You know, it's one of those things that I tell people about when I look back at Enterprise. Enterprise essentially takes everything and shows us how everything got built.
Yeah. One of our, from a long time ago now, 20 years ago when we went to film school. Oh my God.
We
went to film school with a student, not just went, he was a friend of ours. We went to film school with a student whose father, David Stipes,
Yes.
was one of the major, not just a visual effects technician, he was the visual effects guy on pretty much all of Rick Berman's era. No, not pretty much all of Rick Berman era Star Trek.
Yeah.
And he mentioned specifically how the visual effects in Enterprise put a lot of them out of work because they were doing miniatures. That's what David Stipes really was the expert on. Miniatures. And he said he worked for a very short time on Enterprise because Enterprise was the first series to transition completely to CGI.
Yes.
And in some ways, that makes the series not seem so old, but also in other ways, it makes it seem very old.
Very old, especially when you look at it in hindsight.
Yeah, I struggle even to this day with some of the Suliban mutations.
Yes.
It looks incredibly
It
silly.
looks silly.
Yeah,
It really
unfortunately.
does. I hate to say it because, like, as I said, there's a lot of great concepts that Enterprise did. However, the technology that was used during that time around the beginning of the 2000s was in its infancy.
Yeah.
And at the time, you and I as young Mike and David were probably looking, oh my God, look at the technology. We could save money. Look at what they're able to do. They could do this and this. And then, 20 years later, we look back and go, oh my God, they still haven't figured this out.
Yeah. Well, there's something to be said about practical effects. They last longer. They don't age as poorly. It's the reason why Star Wars looks great and is incredibly consistent across the board in terms of their effects, because even though they leaned heavy into CGI sets during the prequels, those sets were still largely made up of bigatures and miniatures.
Yes.
So George Lucas never shied away from still using practical effects with CGI. When you go from practical straight into CGI, there is a stylistic inconsistency when you go from Voyager to Enterprise.
Oh my God, yeah. Dude, I'm glad you brought that up because I did a round of rewatches and I jumped from Voyager to Enterprise right away. You can tell the difference.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know why I didn't see it till now, but Voyager looks so much crisper in detail.
Well, I don't know, David. DePaul's nips were pretty crisp. And that decon. Jesus Christ. That would never happen, dude. Her fucking nips, dude, are just there.
And you know what? As a young Star Trek fan, I was very thankful.
I almost died. What is happening to me?
What is happening to me?
Dude, they might as well just have taken her shirt off. Like,
why couldn't they do this to 7 of 9?
I'm just saying, David, when you leave no room for the imagination and you see her nipples, I'm like, at this point in the game, you might as well just let her take her shirt off.
Yeah, you might as well do the Starship Troopers and just have them just butt naked in the shower.
Yeah. I had forgotten, Dave, that the decon chamber was introduced in the very first episode.
Why couldn't they keep the decon chamber around Mike to hit throughout Star Trek. Come on,
Kirk brings it back.
Kirk just-
100 years later, he's like, Captain Kirk, why are you insistent on the decon chamber? Like, we have filters within the transporter system that takes out all contaminations. Just want to be safe.
Just want to be safe. Just want to be safe.
Just want to be safe. Uhura, come.
We need decon
right now.
Decon for us. Why just us, Captain? Oh,
I like to keep it old school
yeah.
for you and I.
We got to keep privacy.
All right. We need to come to an end. Thank you, David.
Thank you. Live long and prosper.